Okay, so we're going to try and record a video about the ovarian and uterine cycles. And so I'm going to draw through this. We'll talk about this a lot in class and stuff, but I just want to walk through this. So this whole process starts with increased GnRH. Okay, and remember that GnRH comes from the the hypothalamus. Okay, and GnRH has two primary functions. One of which is it stimulates the release of FSH from the anterior pituitary. And the other is that it stimulates the release of LH, luteinizing hormone, also from the anterior pituitary. Now, FSH has two consequences. There's two things that happen as a result of high FSH in women. Okay, the first one is that it causes the follicle as well as the follicle development as well as the egg development, or so follicle and egg development or maturation, however you want to look at this. Okay. The other thing it does is that it stimulates the release of inhibin from the ovaries. And this acts, and we're going to give this a red line here, this acts as a negative feedback loop. Okay. So you don't want too much, you don't want too little. It goes back to that Goldilocks thing. Okay. So we're going to kind of pause on this side and we're going to go to LH. Now, luteinizing hormone causes the release of a lot of estrogen. And estrogen is kind of unique in that it really depends not only on the fact that it's released, but how much is released. And so estrogen, which is released from the ovaries, stimulates luteinizing hormone surge from the anterior pituitary. Okay, and so this is an example. We're going to use green here of a positive feedback loop. And the reason we're calling it a positive feedback loop is because luteinizing hormone is stimulating the release of more luteinizing hormone. It's a little indirect, but it does get there. Ultimately, this leads to ovulation. Okay. Now, what also needs to happen before ovulation occurs is that this follicle and the egg, they need to develop, mature, so that when ovulation occurs, we have a mature egg that's released. Okay, and so this is the dividing line, and we're going to use a white line here to divide the two. And so this is the dividing line between two phases. And so up here at the beginning, we have the follicular phase, so the development of the follicle, and then we got the luteal phase, and this is where the corpus luteum takes over. Okay, but we're going to get to that in just a second here. All right, I'm actually going to move this over here. We're going to do the same with this. Okay, so what's ovulation? Well, there are two things that happen with ovulation. So we're going to change colors here just so we know that we're in a different phase. Um, I don't know why it's so hard. We're going to go to orange because why not? Okay, so ovulation causes two things. Actually, we're going to come over here. Okay, so the egg is released. And we're going to pause on that for now. But then the follicle ruptures. Okay, and that actually leads to the egg releasing. That's kind of all related here, right? So this follicle ruptures and it converts into the corpus luteum. Okay. Now the corpus luteum does three things. Okay, it starts releasing three hormones. So one of those hormones is inhibin. Okay, the corpus luteum stimulates the release of inhibin. This is important because once an egg's released, a woman wants to slow down the development of more follicles so that she doesn't release another egg really closely after. The other thing that happens is that there's the release of estrogen as well as progesterone. Okay. Now we're gonna, for right now, just keep these two things combined. So one of the things that they do is that they increase the endometrial growth. Okay, remember the endometrium is the uterine lining. Okay, and this is going to be the house, the new house for the egg if it's fertilized. So originally, the original house is the follicle. The new house for the fertilized egg is that endometrium. And so we're going to have increased endometrial growth, right? The other thing that happens here is that estrogen and progesterone inhibit, provide negative feedback on GnRH. And so if there's high levels of estrogen and progesterone, that's going to inhibit GnRH. Now, at this point, the amount of estrogen that's being released is much less than the amount of estrogen that was being released here. So we had lots of estrogen here, and down here, it's kind of a moderate level of estrogen. Okay. Now we got to go back to the egg. Now, with the egg, one of two things happens. Okay. And so we're going to put a big or. So the egg is fertilized. And if it's fertilized, it's going to stimulate, whoops, it's going to stimulate, well, basically it's going to lead to here. So it's going to activate or stimulate, and I'm just going to put CL here, or no, I'm not, I'm just going to write it, corpus luteum. So continue releasing estrogen and progesterone, and then all these other things happen. So if there's no fertilization though, this basically, it's not a negative feedback loop per se, but what happens is this is inhibited because what's happening here when the egg is fertilized is that the fertilized egg releases, I should have put this earlier, but it releases HCG. Okay, and so it's this HCG that actually stimulates the corpus luteum to keep releasing estrogen and progesterone. However, if there isn't a fertilized egg, then there isn't any HCG, which means that stimulus for the corpus luteum to continue releasing estrogen and progesterone goes away. Okay, and so then as a result, if that goes away, well, this inhibition goes away, so a woman will start being able to develop follicles, and this inhibition up here will go away, and so a woman will start releasing more GnRH to start this cycle all over. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the uterine stuff. Okay, so primarily what we've talked about is the ovarian cycle, and so that's what's in white. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to add the phases of the uterine cycle. And so the first phase is the menstrual phase. Remember, this is days 1 to 5, give or take. It's not exact, and it's not the same in everyone. And this occurs, remember, this is the shedding of the endometrium. And this occurs due to decreased progesterone and estrogen. Okay. So the lining sheds, and now a woman's able to I guess regenerate, for lack of a better term. So this is where the proliferative phase comes in. So the proliferative phase occurs due to this increase in estrogen, right? So we got this increase in estrogen, and this leads to increased endometrial lining. Okay, so during the proliferative phase, estrogen is dominant. Okay, and then you've got the luteal phase. And so the luteal phase corresponds with the secretory phase. Okay, and what's happening here, and I'm just going to highlight it over here, is that progesterone is going to further increase, whoops, I got to do this, further increase that endometrial growth. Okay. But I would argue that it's primarily due to this progesterone. Okay, and so at the end of the luteal phase, let me back up a minute. So the proliferative is like days 6 to 14. And so this is days 15 to 28. So during that probably second half of the secretory phase, if there's no fertilized egg, so this, then what happens is estrogen and progesterone go away, and the endometrium sheds or degrades, and then you go back to the menstrual phase. And so hopefully seeing all of this together will help you have a better understanding of how the ovarian and uterine cycles occur and the hormones that are causing them.